So there's this sweet spot with every tube amplifier where if you turn the volume to the right spot, the dynamics just come alive and it feels like the amp's actually breathing to you. The problem is that sweet spot is usually way too loud for home recording and for playing on stage, to be honest. But what if I told you there's a way to get that sweet spot while recording silently? Okay, so if you're like me and you recorded guitar at home, you know it can be kind of a nightmare between microphones and setting the levels on your amp, running to the booth to make sure everything sounds good, being too loud for your neighbors. It can just be kind of a lot, which is why I'm using this box right here, the Torpedo Reload II. So this is just gonna sit right on top of my amp, like this, and it's gonna get the job done for basically everything I need. So if you're a regular watcher of my channel, you know I don't do gear videos that often, and that's because I only really want to feature stuff on my channel that I would genuinely endorse and would want to share with other people to see if it would interest them. So when Two Notes announced the Torpedo Reload II, I actually emailed them and said, hey guys, this is something that I could absolutely use in my studio. I want to get my hands on it. How can we make it happen? I told them I was using the Torpedo Captor X for a really long time, and this box is just a huge upgrade from that. So when they saw my email, they said, yeah, we'll get you one sent out, and they're letting me keep it for making this video. So thanks to Two Notes for that. But yeah, I'm super psyched to have this product, so let's check out how I use this on a daily basis in my studio. So this box right here is basically an all-in-one unit to record guitar any way you want. And what I mean by that is you can take your favorite amp, crank it up, and get it to that sweet spot, and then run it completely silent straight into your interface. No microphones, no big setup. It's as plug and play as you can get when you're recording. So let's take a look at the front panel controls of this unit, and then I'll talk about some of the different features you can get out of it and how I like to use it. So starting on the front, the first thing you'll see is two identical channels on the Reload. So basically, you can have channel A and channel B, which can both send via XLR or line out to your interface to record. And what's cool about this is I could use one amp, like my Princeton here, and if I wanted, I could use a separate channel to plug into another cabinet and essentially create a stereo rig with one amp, which is really difficult to do in general. There's not a lot of gear that allows you to do that, but this gives you that flexibility. So not only would you have one amp with two cabinets, you have individual control of the volume of the cabinets and also some EQ sculpting, which we'll get to with the knobs below. So right now, I've got the Reload II sitting on top of my amp, just acting as an attenuator. So what that means is my amp is at gigging volume. I live in a pretty small apartment. I've got neighbors above, right outside the window. Pretty much everywhere you can look, there's neighbors around, and I can't play my amp at the volume that I'd like. And if you didn't know, the louder your amp is, usually the better it sounds, and there's usually that sweet spot, and I just can't get it in this apartment. So that's where this piece of gear kicks in. So right now I've got my amp pretty loud. I know it's a Princeton, but it's actually 22 watts, so this thing cooks, and right now it's at probably over 100 dBs, which I could never do in my apartment. So I've got the Reload sit on top, and essentially this white knob here acts as the attenuator volume for the amp. So I could push the amp as loud as I want, and with this knob down, it's at totally reasonable volumes. That's what this sounds like. So you can hear the amps breaking up, but it is really quiet. And by the way, I'm recording this at like 11 p.m. in my apartment. So yeah, that just goes to show that I feel totally comfortable pushing my amp crazy loud and then using this box as an attenuator to turn it down. So let's take a look at the other knobs on the front panel, and then I'll show you how I've been using this to record at home, both for my YouTube videos and for some studio sessions. So you'll see here, we've got the amp in level. This knob basically controls how much of your amp is getting pushed into the Reload, and you'll see these lights on top. So right now, if I strum, you'll see that it goes from blue to green, and that's telling me that I'm getting a good signal from my amp. If it was going more towards the right here and this light came on, that means I'd be starting to clip. So if I push this a little bit, you'll see now it's letting me know that the signal is going to start clipping, so I'll push it back to where it was. So it's super helpful just visually to know if I'm getting the right signal going into the Reload. Next up, you've got your depth and your presence knobs. So the depth knob can be used to emphasize and affect the low end frequency content of the source audio. Essentially, this is just going to be an extra low-end tone sculpt because when you attenuate your amp and keep the volume pretty low, sometimes you lose some of the EQ frequencies that you normally would hear if you had that volume. It's just a matter of volume. So this allows you to push some low end if you lose it, and vice versa. The presence knob is going to be the treble, so that allows you to push some treble back into your tone if your volume is pretty low on the attenuation. So let's check out, if I just push all of these down, here's what that sounds like. I'll just strum a couple chords. And now if I push those all the way up, you should hear a pretty drastic difference. So you just get some life back into your tone since it's much quieter with the attenuation. So I'm gonna put these back to where I kind of like them. Then we're going to talk about this button right here called the Mojo, and not to be confused with Austin Powers' Mojo.
I've lost my mojo!
That was a stupid joke. But essentially, I don't know exactly what this does, but it just seems to make everything sound a little bit better. So this is with it off. And then this is with it on. Here's it off again. So it just adds some life and some character and kind of makes everything sound better. So that's the Torpedo Reload II just as an attenuator. Just taking my amp, allowing me to crank it and keep the volume low. Just for fun, I'm going to show you. I could push the master all the way up on the amp and push some gain a little bit. So I could never do this, even if I was, in a house where I wasn't sharing walls with neighbors and stuff. This amp is just so loud that when I push the master that loud, it would blow my eardrums out. The cool thing is I push the amp all the way up. I've got the attenuation really low. So now I can get this crazy fuzzed out tone. So this is just the amp being attenuated by the Torpedo. Check this out. And you'll notice how much dynamic there was when I turned the volume knob down. And that's what I look for anytime I'm using a piece of gear with my amp. I want to make sure that when I've got some gain or distortion, if I just turn my guitar down, I can still get a clean tone. So this absolutely passes the test with that. So I'll throw some screenshots of the back panel of this unit as well, but it has so much more flexibility. As I mentioned, it allows you to run in stereo, but it also has a stereo effects loop. So if you wanted... Hey, so it's Editing Jesse here. I didn't do a good job in the video explaining the effects loop. Basically what the unit allows you to do is put an effects loop for an amplifier that doesn't have one. A lot of like vintage amps, vintage combo amps in particular, don't have effects loop. Basically what an effects loop does is it puts your effects between the preamp and the power amp of an amp, essentially allowing you to bypass like the gain in your amp if you want your reverb and delay tails to be clean instead of dirty because you're running a dirty amp. But that's basically it. I didn't do a good job explaining it. Let's get back to it. Another what seems to be underrated feature about this and how I might use it in the future is it acts as a power amp. And basically what that means is if you run out of like a Helix or Quad Cortex or something that's, a digital amp modeler, you could plug that into this and this will act as your power amp. And then that will run through your cabinet. So you could basically run your digital monitor through an amp cabinet without getting like a specific power cab that, you have to buy with a Helix or a Quad Cortex. So super, super useful if you want to run your digital sound through an actual amp cab. I mean, that's pretty cool. And To do that, all I would do is go to this little line versus amp switch and just switch it to line, and we'd be good to go. What's also awesome about that is you can have everything plugged in at the same time. So if I was running a line out via my modeler, plus I had my amp in, I could just switch it on the fly, which is amazing for home recording. You know, once I get this fully set up in my studio, I can just have everything plugged in, decide if I'm running out of the amp today, out of the Reload, or through like a modeler or something like that, or stereo, wet, dry, wet, you know, whatever it needs. But now I'm going to show you how I'm going to use this thing the most, and that's actually as a load box to plug my amp in and record silently, because the attenuation is awesome and I can play in my living room out of my amp right now, but the best feature for me is that I can use my amp silently and then plug into my DAW and basically use Notes Genome, which has tons of cabinets to choose from, and I can sort of sculpt the sound that I want when I record. So let's take a look at that. Alright, so we're sat on the couch in the living room. I've got my computer monitor up here, which is showing me what you're seeing right now. This is the Notes Genome software. I'm not going to go that into detail about the software itself, only because I've made a video about that in the past. But the idea is, right now, I've got my Princeton plugged in. I've got the Torpedo Reload II sat on top of the amp. And then the amp is being sent to my computer. So my guitar cabinet is currently turned off. And what's happening is I've grabbed a Fender Princeton style cabinet inside of Notes Genome, which is acting as the cabinet for me. So I can record my amp silently right now directly to my computer. So right now I've just got like a basic clean tone set up. It sounds very similar to my amp in the room. So just a really nice glassy clean tone, perfect for a Strat. So what makes this amazing is if I go in here into Genome, after the fact of recording any guitar, I could change up any parameter of the recording I sent, other than the amp. So basically the Princeton is the amp that's going in. But if I wanted to, let's just make an extreme example. I'll throw on this 412 cabinet, so like similar to like a Marshall cab, and you wouldn't typically run a 412 speaker with a Fender Princeton, but that's what that would sound like. So that's the difference between, that's the 412. Let's go back to the 110. So this is the Princeton. All right, so let's take a look at some other things that I can do, because right now, if you think about it, if it's just my amp being sent to my computer, I have the option of not only recording my amp and then creating an IR cab here, I could also mic up my amp cabinet. So basically the recording would be dry. Then after the fact, I could go in here and add some different effects. So for example, Genome's got this studio delay that I really like. So now you can hear there's a little bit of delay on my tone, again, just coming from the DAW itself. I want, I could wash it out with some reverb, which would sound like this. So that's pretty cool. Now, again, right now my amp's at a pretty clean spot. If I was in my studio and I wanted to crank my amp to 10, that would be impossible. But with the Reload 2, I can do that. So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna crank my amp up all the way to 10. So it should be pretty fuzzed out and crazy distorted. But because I'm recording silently, it's no issue with any of my neighbors or anything like that. So check this out. So I haven't changed anything except for the master volume being cranked on my amp. So we went from that clean tone before to something that's a little more like this. Let me turn off the wet effects first. So you can hear it's pretty cranked now. It's great for that rock sound. It's also great for some lead stuff. So if I throw on some of that delay and reverb, just turn the delay down a little bit. And now I've also got a little bit of gain on tap from the Brown amplification protein, so it sounds like this. So again, my amp is cranked all the way up, not much else going on, and it's giving me that insane tone. Again, if you're hearing any bleed, it's just from my studio monitors in my room, which are very, very quiet. I feel, no pressure to turn down by anyone, which is always the goal. I also want to mention, I could be doing the same thing right now, just running my Line 6 HX Stomp, basically as a modeler to the power amp in the Reload 2, and then be doing the same thing, still using software from Genome to impact the tone and stuff like that. So again, this is just a really useful tool. Just to give you an example, maybe I want to use no, let's go for this Vibralex cab instead. And this is what it would sound like. And I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit. So instead of having a really dirty sound like this, if I just turn it down a little bit, I've got a great crunch rhythm tone. And again, with modelers, you don't get stuff like that. It's really using these reactive load boxes with your amp to get that feel that your amp gives you. Just sounds so good. So to me, this is the killer feature of this product. I mean, it does so much already, but just being able to record my amp silently and still get that amp feel and tone is so important to me. And the fact that it's so easy, I mean, I just pulled it out of the box and it did the trick. It just makes it so awesome. And it's something I would highly recommend to anyone that wants to record professionally, silently, and doesn't want to have to go through using modelers all the time. So at the end of the day, if you're the type of person who just wants to add an effects loop to your amp that doesn't have one, if you want to run stereo with one amp and two cabs, if you want to go wet, dry, wet, or you just want to attenuate your amp or record silently, this thing will do it. I'm sure there's more stuff that I can do that I haven't thought of, and there's going to be people in the comments that might recommend something, so let me know. I just wanted to thank 2Notes for sending me this piece of gear. It's going to be in so many videos moving forward, sat on top of my amp, and it's just a really killer studio tool. For now, though, my name's Jesse Glick. Hit the subscribe button if you're keen, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.